Welcome back to the Chasing Happiness podcast, an honest podcast about finding happiness, what it really means, and the process of getting there. My name is Crystal, and today I have the wonderful pleasure of speaking with Tanya Hackney. And you're going to correct me if I got your last name wrong, Tanya, because I wasn't entirely sure how to pronounce it.
That's okay. That's Tanya Hackney.
Perfect. And the reason we're speaking today is because you have led a very interesting life. You're actually raising a family on a boat, which I know a lot of people are going to hear and they're going to go, wait, what? She's driving around a yacht? It's not that simple. You guys actually, you have had a big family and you actually had a baby while you were living on the boat, based on what I understand. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have 5 children. We've lived on our 48-foot catamaran for 12 years and traveled a good bit of that time. My oldest is now 20 and my youngest is 10. And so when we moved aboard, we had 4 kids under the age of 8 and then added a 5th child after we had started traveling.
That's a lot. So let's start with, you had 4 kids and you decided you were going to live on a boat. I'm sure the parents listening to this podcast are thinking in their minds, what on earth made that choice?
Sure. Well, lots of wonderful ideas sound crazy. So I always say sanity is overrated. We had a very sane and wonderful life, but it was, kind of boring and wasn't very fulfilling. And so we swapped our sane and wonderful life for an exciting life, which has been both, the goods are better and the bads are worse. So it's been really an exciting journey. We lived in Atlanta, in a city. We had 2 kids and a house with a white picket fence. And we had what most people would consider the American dream. And we just had this idea from when we were kids, when we were teenagers, of sailing away. And we had tried to figure out how to do it when we were younger, but it's really hard to buck the system. It's really hard to swim upstream. We didn't really have a clue how to do it. We didn't know how to fund the dream. We didn't know, neither of us were, expert sailors. So we went about, the normal life until we just couldn't stand it anymore. And we kind of kept that dream alive and then did a U-turn. And at the time we only had 3 kids when we left Atlanta. We had 3 kids under 3, which, was plenty of insanity, but we just decided, well, we're already doing this crazy thing. Let's see if we can take this show on the road. And we moved back to Florida to be near our families and to swap out our luxury car for a sailboat. And we learned to sail on a small sailboat and then kind of made a 5-year plan. By the end of the 5-year plan, we had a 4th child. And then we moved aboard our old wooden catamaran and began fixing it up. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So I am so in love with this story for so many different reasons, because a lot of the women I work with are moms and they struggle with the 9-to-5 job and being a mom, but still doing the thing that sets their soul on fire. And you guys found a way to not only follow your passion and be able to travel, but to instill that into your kids, even though it did take some time, based on what you're saying, to get a plan in place and work it all out. So I'm sure as you went through your 5-year plan, there were people in your life who thought, oh my God, this is definitely not going to work out. How did you manage, for those who are listening and thinking, oh my God, this is inspiring, I want to do something similar, maybe not necessarily on a boat, but in some way, shape, or form. How did you manage to keep moving forward, even though people thought it was a little out of the norm?
Well, one of my strongest character traits is stubbornness, and stubbornness can look like, willfulness, maybe in the wrong direction, but it can also look like determination. So I wasn't really going to let other people determine for me what life was supposed to be like. I had done a little bit of that, like living up to the expectations, going to college and getting married and buying a house and having kids. We did some of those normal things. But when we decided what we really wanted, what we thought would really make us happy and give us a fulfilling life, there wasn't anybody who could have talked us out of it. And so if someone tried to talk us out of it, we just would sort of put some distance between us and them. And we would surround ourselves with people who thought that this was a really cool idea. I mean, there are lots of people traveling in different ways, RV people and world schoolers. And we were in a homeschool community. And so we were already kind of working our way outside the box already. We had decided not to pull our kids out of a normal life, and that the secret would be never giving them a normal life. So that we set that expectation early that this was going to be an adventure, and not necessarily, the train ride from point A to point B.
I love that. And you, I think, are sort of this exception to the rule. Most people, like you said, live sort of the life they're supposed to. And it takes them a really long time, especially when they have children, to start to embrace things outside of that sort of box. But you guys decided, even with children, even with adding more children, we're going to continue to live this out of the box sort of life. So describe to me a little bit about what that's been like, because I know personally, just living the life that I live, being confined to a small space, sometimes with the people you love and care about, can be a little challenging. And you guys are all on a boat most of the time.
Yeah. Let's see. We have a large family. So we kind of felt like we were going to be all on top of each other, even in a house. I don't care how big the house is. If you have your kids at home with you, whether it's because of a pandemic or because you decided to homeschool or because you like to travel, if you're going to be all in the same place together, you might as well go have some fun. And so I think that that's kind of how we approached it. It isn't all fun and games. It is hard. There's a lot of conflict. Anybody who's helped their kids with with homework, or who was, sort of forced to homeschool during the pandemic, understands that there are things that have to get done. The work does have to get done. The laundry has to get done. The food has to get prepped. We do have to do the have-tos to make the life happen. But I feel like there's a really big reward for that hard work. And when we decided to go sailing, I mean, you get your schoolwork done in the morning, and maybe there's snorkeling in the afternoon. You have some big rewards to offer for the hard work. Living outside the box, our kids don't really know what that means because it's normal for them. So I would say our oldest kids probably appreciate it the most. They were 8, 7, and 6 when we moved aboard. My youngest was 3, I think, at the time when we moved aboard. And then, of course, we had a baby that has lived aboard her whole life. So the youngest 2 are now 14 and 10. And if you ask them what's it like to live on a boat, they don't really understand what you're asking them, because for them, that was just normal life. They do hear from people constantly, "Oh my gosh, I wish I had been raised in your home. I wish your parents were my parents." Or, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said, "You guys are the luckiest kids on earth," we would be very wealthy at this point. I mean, they definitely hear it from outsiders that this is a unique and wonderful life. I think until they have a little bit of perspective on it, they might not really fully appreciate it. And yet I know that they do love, especially the travel, especially the cool exotic locations that we've been in, and the swimming in crystal clear waters and gorgeous nights and gorgeous days at sea. I think we have so many sparkling memories that hopefully it makes up for some of the hardships, like storms at sea and conflict and hot days or hot nights when you can't sleep, some of the discomforts that we've had. I hope that the highs make up for the lows, I guess is what I'm saying.
I love that. And I'm sure, especially with your older children, now that they are starting to gain some of that perspective, that they absolutely feel that way. And I can understand the people who sort of envy the lifestyle, because I think there is a big risk in taking the chance to do what you guys did. And that stops a lot of people from following their passion, their dreams, the things that they want to achieve. So how did you guys handle that risk assessment in your own minds?
Humans are really good at asking what if, what if we get eaten by sharks? What if we get attacked by pirates? What if the engine fails? What if, and you have this like litany of worst case scenarios. I'm what you might call a worst case scenario junkie. I read every survival story from people whose ship was wrecked and they were living in their life raft. I mean, like I was, gravitated toward those stories. For me, I want to know how would I handle that worst case scenario? Because if I can sort of figure that out inside my own head, like, would I be okay with the worst case scenario? Then anything less than that is going to be okay. Tim Ferriss, he has a TED Talk where he talks about fear setting instead of goal setting. And I love this TED Talk because he says, instead of, setting these goals for yourself that you may might then feel like a failure if you don't achieve them. He says maybe you should list those what ifs and then figure out how to mitigate them. And so I guess without having watched that TED Talk, I sort of figured that out for myself. And so we do that risk assessment, like, can we live with the worst case scenario? And we try and figure out how we would handle the worst case scenario. And then everything else, is easy compared to that thing. I would still say it was scary. It was pretty terrifying to leave the normal life. I remember feeling really nervous when we sold our house in Atlanta. We sold at a bad time, so it was not a good financial decision. And then we tried to make a better decision the second time around, but the economy collapsed. We sold a house in 2009 after that sort of housing bubble burst in North America, and sold at a loss. And so I would say we made some very terrible financial decisions. You don't make the decisions that we made, hoping to have a nest egg to retire on. We made a really big trade-off, and we knew it even at the time. Like, if you look at our website, it says Jay and Tanya bought Take Two to slowly go broke while showing their kids the world and having a great time. Like, we knew that we were trading a retirement adventure for an adventure with our family when they were young. And so we were, instead of putting money in the bank, we were putting memories in the bank. It means we'll probably have to work a lot longer. It means we'll have to be more careful when we're older. But I guess the thing that drove us to do the unusual thing was this fear of regret. So I didn't want to get to the end of my life and wish that I had worked less, or wish that I had spent less time watching TV, or wish that I had spent more time with my children, or wished that I had traveled more. I wanted to know that, like, if I die tomorrow, I died doing the thing that I loved, or I died trying. And that, I guess, to me, regret is worse than fear. And so I'll do something that I'm scared of because I don't want to regret having missed the opportunity. And when we went sailing, that was something that really drove us, is that feeling of, yes, it could be scary, but what if we love it? There's this other what if. What if it's amazing? What if it completely transforms our lives? What if this is the thing that we were meant to do and we missed it? So we all ask what if, but I think you have to be very careful about what your questions are. As we say, well, what if we hate it? What if this is a terrible financial decision? What if it's scary? Well, what if it's wonderful? What if it's amazing? What if it's the best life? We don't want to miss that opportunity.
I love that. And I love reframing the sort of what ifs, because one of the what ifs that I think about when I hear your story is, what if your children grow up in a world where they don't think about money first? They think about the other humans they meet, the other experiences in the world, the other cultures, versus the world that most people grow up in, where everything is driven by money. So I love the reframing of that. And you brought up the name of the boat, the Take Two. So do you want to talk a little bit about sort of how you guys decided on this particular boat, why you named it, what you did, sort of how you went about not necessarily building it because it was a boat, but making it comfortable for you all to actually live a life for this long on?
The boat name story is actually a good one. We had been living in Florida for a couple of years. We were learning to sail a little 22-foot race boat on the weekends. We had, 3 little kids and then a 4th little kid. And we saw this boat, this old monohull. It was a Tanya 55 for anybody who's out there who knows boats. It was a great boat. And we had called the broker and walked around on it just to kind of see what it was like on the inside. And I just felt like moved. I don't know, like I had a spiritual moment where I felt like this is what we're supposed to do. Like, I could feel this tingling sensation and like almost an audible voice saying, like, this is your future. So we began to talk about buying that boat. And it was a fantastic boat. It would have been great for our family. At that point, I think we only had 3 kids. So, there were 3 cabins, a bunk bed for our boys, and then a single berth for our daughter, and then a really big cabin in the stern for my husband and myself. And so we were able to kind of imagine ourselves doing it. And so we started to walk through the process of buying this boat. And we were very nervous, and we're praying people, so we would pray about it. And then the broker would call and say, well, the owner lowered the price. So we're like, oh, it's a sign we should do it. And then we would talk about all the things that needed to be fixed. And we hemmed and we hawed and we waited and waited. And then somebody swooped in and bought this boat and sailed it away. And I was so devastated. I thought, oh my gosh, our opportunity knocked. and we didn't answer the door. We missed it. We have missed it. Not only did this boat sail away, but like, will we ever get a chance to do this again? Did our dream just sail away? And I just remember crying in the shower. That's my favorite place to cry because the kids aren't around. You're like having your private moment and feeling like just this loss of this dream, and really that deep feeling of regret. If we had not failed to buy that boat, I don't know if we would have maybe chickened out the second time it came around. But when Take Two became available, my husband found it online. That was the name of the boat. I mean, it came with that name. So in filmmaking, it was our second take. It was the second chance for us. So the name was perfect. We went and looked at it, and we knew the minute we walked aboard, it was like falling in love. You just know that is the one for you. And at that point, we had 4 kids. The youngest was about a year old, and it was scary, but also exciting. And so we went forward with that. And I can tell you from that, when I say that regret is worse than fear, I speak from a place of experience. We had that feeling of regret of our dreams sailing away, and knew that whatever we would face, trying to move 4 little kids aboard a sailboat wasn't going to feel as bad as letting that boat sail away. So maybe someone else can benefit from that story without having to have that regret.
I love that. And I love how the world sort of opened another opportunity for you. One door closed and it was not a wonderful experience, but the universe said, hey, if you really want this, here's this second chance. Here's this ability to try again. And rather than being fearful of losing it again, you just said, you know what, if we're going to go for it, let's go for it. And I think there is such a big lesson in that, especially because you guys did this back in 2008, I think it was. And then you moved on to the boat in 2009.
That's
so
right.
you had a good 10 years of living on a boat before the COVID world hit. Most people got hit by COVID and suddenly had to figure out how to live comfortably with their friends and their family or whoever they were living with in a tiny little space. You guys had already figured out how that all worked. You had a good structure in place. So when COVID hit, did it disrupt anything about your lifestyle?
On the one hand, we were completely prepared to handle something like that. I mean, in a way, a boat is a little bit of an escape pod. We've often viewed it as such. If you don't like your neighbors, you move, or if something's, driving you onward, you go to the next place, or, whatever. We're somewhat self-contained. And of course, because we have a large family, our kids are friends with each other and they're built-in playmates. At the same time, we had come back from the Caribbean in 2019 because our teenagers needed something that the boat no longer provided. There were lots and lots of teenagers where we had spent a hurricane season in the Rio Dulce in Guatemala, and there had been lots and lots of friends and social opportunities. So I don't regret any of it. I just knew that at 16, 17, and 18, our older kids were ready to start their own lives. And they needed to pursue the next, educational decisions, and they needed to learn how to drive a car, and they needed to reconnect with old friends in Florida and to see their grandparents who they hadn't seen in a while. And so we came back to do all that, and we had like this glorious, 6 months or something before everything changed. And so they had launched headlong into this sort of new life of connecting with things on shore, and then everything was curtailed. There was a little bit of disappointment because, the world sort of closed down just at the time where they were opening up to it.
Right.
So we kind of like all reluctantly said, okay, well, I guess it's back to homeschool. The teenagers had been taking classes at the local community college, getting dual enrollment credit. So doing high school and college simultaneously, which is a great thing that we have in Florida. And so they went back to taking classes online and doing their own thing. But there was definitely some disappointment and hardship in that. And we don't live a solitary life. We live inside a community, a very vibrant, connected community of sailors. And so to some degree that continued because we have an outdoor lifestyle. It wasn't maybe like a hard lockdown like some people experienced. At the same time, when you're trying to set your kids free, it felt like their wings were clipped. And that was really hard. I think it was probably hardest on my oldest son. His last year at home he was a little grumpy. Like when he finally left, he was 20 when he moved out. And I think, I saw a lot of the joy return when he was able to be independent and start his own life. He there were probably a lot of young men and women who, were on the cusp of fledging and leaving the nest and whose wings were clipped. And so I'm sure that they could relate to the hardships there.
Oh, I'm sure. And I think regardless of how people have lived their lives in some way, especially in that age category you're talking about, life did sort of come to a standstill and doors were shut. And there was no ability for that generation at all to sort of start to experience any kind of freedom. So I love that the world has kind of started to open back up and that people are able to at least start that process, because as you've seen, I'm sure with your kids, it's magical to watch kids be able to come into their own and decide sort of what it is that they want and how they want to experience the world and what that all means. So I love that we're now hopefully getting to a place where that's becoming much more regular. But because your kids are getting older, what do you guys plan for the next 10 years? Are you keeping the boat? Are you going to keep traveling with the younger kids? Have you made a decision about any of that?
Sorry, I had to close my hatch because my cat was thinking about jumping out of our boat. Sorry about the break there.
That's okay.
Distractions. The next, like what's on the horizon is really hard to predict. My husband and I have no plans to sell the boat. In fact, we have this idea that someday we'll take our grandchildren sailing. We'll see, like, or if any of our kids want to come back and do trips with their future spouse, or, we would be willing to do a wedding on the deck of Take Two. I mean, we have like an imagination for like what could come next, but no real desire to buy land anywhere or build a nest egg elsewhere. I'm hoping that the world opens back up enough that we can travel again. Obviously, living on a boat, if you can't go anywhere, isn't so much fun. We'll continue to cruise Florida waters and East Coast and things like that. It's very cost prohibitive right now. Like if we were going to try and take everyone who's still aboard, so all 6 of us, to the Bahamas, just with the PCR testing and trying to plan weather windows and testing windows, it's so complicated so our immediate plans are not for sea travel. Our kids are one by one launching, and so we're trying to provide a stable platform for that. And so we're kind of stuck in the Florida Keys. It's a great place to be stuck. I would say in the next year or so, we'll probably try and pick a new location, figure out. We need to do a haul out, which is when you lift the boat out of the water and you redo the bottom. So it's time for bottom paint, which means we need to think about where we want to go to do that. And, we're thinking maybe East Coast, Carolinas. We could go back over to the Bahamas if they've opened up again. We've done a bunch of road trips during COVID, which has been really cool. We did an 8,000-mile, 8-week trip with our 3 youngest kids to Utah and back, and we did 10 national parks and lived in Airbnbs and went skiing and snowboarding and hiking, and we had a kind of a land adventure that was very different for my seafaring kids, and got to experience some of the different seasons that we don't normally experience in the tropics. So I can imagine doing some more road trips. Beyond that, we've talked about going back through back to Panama and then going through the canal, maybe cruising the west coast of Mexico. It had always been on our bucket list to cross the Pacific on our boat. We didn't do that for a couple reasons. Part of it was my husband's job. He's a digital nomad, and so he needed to continue working and had, internet connectivity needs. And part of it was that one of our sons, second son, gets horribly seasick and would not have enjoyed. Yeah, I know. It's one of those things we didn't know when we bought the boat. What about seasickness? Everybody gets, uncomfortable to varying degrees. Myself and my oldest son seem to feel it the least. My husband usually just prevents seasickness with medication. And then the other kids kind of, depending on the weather, depending on the sea state, will medicate or not medicate. But one of our kids just never gets over it. He never gets over feeling bad. And so we plan trips for calm weather and, shorter island hopping type of passages rather than really big, long ocean passages. So when he's gone, I think we would feel a little less guilty, maybe doing longer legs. So I guess it's possible that we'll still cross an ocean. I don't know. I don't really know what the future holds. But we can dream, right?
Absolutely.
Why not?
If your life hasn't been a dream, I don't know what it has been, because it sounds like to me, and I'm sure to most of the people listening, you've lived out that dream. So why not keep dreaming and keep moving forward? But one of the things you did bring up is the fact that you've sort of done this little bit of land travel with your younger kids now. So I wonder, do the younger kids have a preference now that they've experienced sort of this traveling on land versus traveling by sea? Are they particular about it?
There are pros and cons to everything. I think one of the nice things about driving in a vehicle is that you can stop the vehicle and run around, or if you come to a location that you like, you can stay a little longer. When you're traveling by boat, if you are between locations, our longest passage, for example, was between Georgetown, Bahamas, and the east side of Puerto Rico. That was an 8-day trip, and it wasn't, not all 8 of those days was smooth sailing. Some of it was really uncomfortable. Some of it was beautiful. It was kind of the best and the worst all mixed up. But you can't just stop the boat. So you're running that boat, either sailing or motoring, 24/7, and someone's got to be on watch all the time, and you get cabin fever, and there's just nothing you can do about it. If you're uncomfortable, you just have to suck it up and look forward to the time when you're anchored or at a dock, and you can go back on shore. It's very, very different. I mean, I think the way that we traveled, we rented an SUV and drove from Airbnb to Airbnb. It might be different if we had rented an RV, where it would be sort of more like apples to apples, where your house is with you.
Right.
I think our boat is actually more spacious than a similar RV. So I think it would probably cramp our style a little bit if we swapped out the boat for the RV. But then you have the benefit of being able to kind of like stop and stretch your legs. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I would love to know. I know there are families who do a little bit of both, and they might have more insight about that. Travel is kind of like this thing I'll always do. I don't care, what the limitations are. I'll go somewhere and do something because I just love to travel. Travel is life. And so whether that's, hopping in the car and driving across the Everglades to visit my family on the other coast of Florida, or whether that's, ocean travel or, whatever it is, I like to be on the move, and that we'll do that as much as possible, regardless of, regardless of outward circumstances. We'll do as much as we can.
I love that, because you're kind of speaking to my soul. So I'm up here in Canada, and we've had some pretty severe lockdowns during COVID. And I was in Southern Ontario. And after about 1.5 years of not being able to travel, I decided I was moving across the country because I needed change and I needed to experience something I had never experienced before. And so I've come out to the really far East Coast now in order to do that. And I think the one thing that you end up really missing when you don't travel, whether it's within your own country or whether it's to other countries, is you miss how different life is in different places. So because you guys have been to dozens and dozens of places, you've seen the different ways hundreds and thousands of people live. Is there a specific place that you've been that sort of calls to your heart, or have you just enjoyed every little bit of all the different places?
We really, really loved the island hopping in the Eastern Caribbean, but we left a little piece of our hearts in Central America. We love food and culture and language differences. We loved our time that we spend in Guatemala. I can really imagine going back there. Usually, if I'm presented with a choice of repeating an experience or getting to do a new experience, I almost always choose for the new experience. Even though there might be a place I would say, I would go back there someday. If I'm given the option, I'll always go to the new place. But I really could imagine going back to Guatemala and spending more time there, especially. That was a particularly rich spot for us, just for friendships and connections with local people and opportunities to give back. We feel very enriched by our time there and can imagine spending more time. It's a great place to go get a boat fixed too. So if we had some more work that we wanted to do on our boat, we might consider going back there, pulling the boat out of the water, having some work done on it, renting a house, exploring more of that beautiful, beautiful country. And the people are beautiful. And I taught an English class, and I have sort of, an adopted son and daughter. They're in their 20s, and I really miss them. And we established ourselves there a little bit. I always feel this tugging when we put down roots. If we stay too long in a place, I begin to, then it's harder and harder to leave, and you leave a little piece. I've left little pieces of my heart everywhere. So it depends on how long we've stayed in a place and how close the relationships are with the people there. our life is very much saying hello and goodbye in the same moment.
Mm. Well, let's chat a little bit about that, because I think the one thing people, when they think about nomads, they don't necessarily think about how difficult those relationships can be, because you are, as you said, basically meeting someone, getting to know them, sort of falling in love with places, people, and culture. And then you're saying goodbye pretty quickly, depending on circumstances. So, how have you guys managed that? Because with a family as big as yours, everybody would have different feelings about different places and different comfort levels when you leave.
Yeah, there's a tearing of fabric, no matter how long you stay in a place. Some of us are extroverted and some of us are introverted. Some of us, it takes a lot longer to establish those relationships, and then it's probably harder for the introverts to continuously uh, rip that fabric and then try and stitch it back together again. One of the cool things about our life that people might not realize, and I think it's true of RV families as well to some degree, is that the community of sailors, like, we keep running into the same people over and over again. And so people who've been doing it for a while, over multiple seasons, might find themselves in the same marina or in the same hurricane hole as someone that they met in the last season or the last hurricane season. So we're constantly traveling with this lovely group of people, and they become like your family, the chosen family. And so would never say that our life is lonely. There are moments of solitude for sure, where we're anchored in a beautiful place, experiencing, nature kind of unspoiled and, in its majesty, when it's just us and no one else. And then there are lots and lots of times when there's, people getting together to play music or a game of dominoes, or like teaching English classes, or cookouts and potlucks. There's a huge community of people, and they're typically all of them unplugged, and so they're very much about some of the same things that we are, connecting with people, not digitally, but like real three-dimensional people, and they're about relationships. And when you're traveling like that, and you might only know someone for a week or two and then not see them again for another year, you don't have a lot of time for small talk. So pretty quickly whether you're going to get along or not get along. And you might glom onto someone and they might be your best friend for a few weeks, and then you might not see them again for a long time, but you have made this deep friendship that doesn't disappear. You keep in touch with these people. We have forever friends from our journeys that we keep in touch with. And then when we went on our road trip, we ended up visiting with some of those boat friends who had moved back to land. And that was so cool. That was one of the coolest things about that road trip, was realizing, this permanent group of friends that we had made while we were out sailing. They're very deep and powerful relationships.
I love that. And I love that you were able to reconnect with some of them on land, because when you're a part of a community, a lot of times you think about that community in that space and not anywhere else. So the fact that you were able to connect with them outside of your little space, I think that's just magical. And that must have been fun for the kids as well.
Yeah, I think probably one of my favorite things from our road trip was we reconnected with some friends of ours. They were a young sailing couple who had been on a dock next to us in Florida one year. They had taken off and gone to the Eastern Caribbean, and then they ended up getting pregnant and having a baby, and they needed to go back to their families and earn some more money and try and figure out how to get back out there, but maybe as a family. And so they had moved back to Utah and started a little coffee shop. And we contacted them because we were like, I wonder where they are. And, you're lovingly known by your boat name in our community. So, my name ends up being Tanya Take Two. And we went to visit the Jalapenos. The name of their boat was Jalapenos. So we went to see the Jalapenos. We're like, where are they? What are they up to now? And we contacted them. And we were in Arizona. We were headed to Page, Arizona to just check out Lake Powell. It was early spring, so it was still pretty cold. But they said, Lake Powell is one of our favorite places. We'll come down, we'll meet you, and we'll bring a boat, and we'll go out on Lake Powell on a boat. And there won't be anybody on the lake because it's freezing still. And so they actually bought their little lake boat down, and we rented an Airbnb together. And we had not seen these people in years. And we just knew because we loved them, that it would all be great. It was so much fun. So we rented an Airbnb together. They brought their 2 little kids, and it was so fun to get to know them, in their new capacity as parents. And we had known them as young sailors, and they took us out on the lake. We had an amazing week with them. And then they said, why don't you guys come up when you make it to Salt Lake City? Why don't you come up and see us again? And then we're going to be gone for a week. If you're there the last week of March, then you can stay in our house. And we live 30 minutes from Brighton Ski Resort. So they invited us so we got to hang out with them again at Salt Lake, and then we stayed in their house for a week and went skiing every day. I mean, it was, we could not have planned that. There's no way that, in our own ability to make a plan, we could not have planned that. That was just serendipity and fellowship. It was beautiful. And we would do the same thing for any one of those sailing friends, should they want to come down to the Florida Keys and visit. And they do. I mean, we do. We get back together with people all the time. So it's a tight-knit family. It's a very, very tight-knit family.
I love that. That is so much magic in what you just said. And one of the things that I wonder, because you guys have sailed almost exclusively sort of warm waters, have you ever debated sailing colder waters, coming further north or heading over to Europe? Now that your kids are getting a little bit older.
We just don't love cold weather. We love it in very small doses. Like, if there happens to be a mountain with some snow on it, we don't mind sliding down it. As far as cold water, I don't think we're charmed by cold water. The farthest north we've ever been was Washington, D.C. We took our kids on a history trip one year. We cruised up the East Coast, visited all these old colonial cities, and studied American history while we were traveling.
Oh, wow.
We made it all the way up. We stayed at the Capitol Yacht Club for 3 weeks, and we did field trips every day to all of the Smithsonian museums and to all of the historical landmarks. And we arrived at Mount Vernon, which is, George Washington's home in Virginia, by water, which is kind of cool because that's the way that people would have traveled up and down the Potomac. That's how they would have come to these estates. So we had these really wonderful, authentic history experiences. But we knew that it was time to make a U-turn because it started to get cold, like mid-October. By the end of October, it was freezing temperatures at night, and we had to go outside Cape Hatteras because we have a very tall mast, so we can't use the inland waterway. So we were planning for this trip, and it was awful, like having to wear the foul weather gear. I kind of ate, slept, sailed in this giant suit, and it was not the most fun I've ever had sailing. It was an adventure. It was definitely an adventure. But we started to realize, if we wanted to go up to Maine or Nova Scotia, I mean, there are lots of people who do that trek in the summertime, and it's gorgeous sailing up there. I mean, part of me really would love to go further north, but I know what it's like when you get chased by those cold fronts come, end of October.
Right.
And I'm not sure the benefit is worth the cost. I'm weighing those. I'm weighing that doing that cost benefit analysis, and I'm not sure that it comes out in favor. We did do a road trip one year up to Maine in the fall, and so we've gotten to experience those northern parts in different seasons. But I like to be where we can swim off the back of the boat in crystal clear water, turquoise water. So. Some trips are land trips and some trips are sea trips. And I think we're probably going to stick to the warm water.
Totally fair. As a Canadian who has to deal with that cold weather, I totally understand where you're coming from. I do wonder.
We meet lots and lots of Canadians. There's an annual migration. I don't know if where you are, if you're seeing sailboats if you're close to the coast, but Canadians are amazing, hardy, brave sailors, and they will sail up and down the eastern coast of North America to and from the Bahamas sometimes every year for years and years, just making their migration just like a flock of birds heading for warmer weather.
That's actually what we call it. We call it snowbirds up here because people do. The weather starts to get colder and off they go. Yep.
Yeah, I've been wondering, since you're in Canada, what was that like during COVID? I noticed that in Florida, we had a lot of domestic travelers during COVID once our road opened back up to the islands, but that we missed our Canadian travelers. I mean, we have Canadians who come down to Florida every year, and there was like a whole year where we didn't see, a maple leaf flag anywhere. That must have been interesting. So there are people who kind of escape winter every year who probably went through at least one and maybe two really hard winters and hadn't had to do that when they were
For a long
used to traveling.
time. Yeah. So what happened here is depending on where you lived, sort of depended on how easy the travel was. And so a lot of people, based on cost and based on, sort of the struggle of getting back into the country, if they chose to leave, chose to stay. And I can tell you just personally, out of the friends and family that I know, probably about 90% chose to stay. And that's a huge number when you think about the economics of people who typically travel down south for 3 to 6 months of the year. And as you said, when you're not used to the cold, having to put up with it for that long and having to, deal with the shoveling and the windstorms and everything else that comes, it was an emotional toll for a lot of people. So, there's still some struggle because your land border has just opened up to us as Canadians to travel by land now. So a lot of people are choosing to go south now, but there is still a little bit of a cost to come back, testing that has to be done, all of those things that we talked about as you guys are trying to navigate through other countries. So there are still some people who are choosing to stay behind this year too. And it's a little sad as a Canadian because I typically travel in the winter 2 or 3 times as well. I like to escape the cold weather as much as I can. And I haven't really been able to do that either. So I'm, like most people, thinking about what are my alternatives? How can I find a way to experience some of what I miss without having to go to some of those far off places? But also a big part of travel for me is going to some of that warmer weather in the cold. And so how do you manage that? And, there is always sort of that debate of what's worth it, what's not. So for me personally, a lot of local travel has happened. A lot of just in-country travel has happened because it's easier to travel within the country than it is outside of the country. And so there's been a lot of that. But, I'm hopeful that with the end of this year and the start of the new year, things get back to where they were. I cannot wait to get on an airplane again. And most people hate that experience, but I'm just itching to get on an airplane and just go somewhere else and experience culture and life in a different way that I haven't for a while. So I know there's quite a few people that are sort of in the same boat, and I'm hopeful this year you will get some of those Canadian flags back because I think a lot of people have just finally, they were willing to suck it up for the first year and they were willing to do what was being asked of them by the government. And now people are just wanting to get back to life. So I think you're going to see a lot of people this year.
Yeah, and that cultural exchange is really, really important. I think we probably will never take it for granted again how important interpersonal communication is, in person, face-to-face communication, and meeting other human beings where they are, realizing that you have so much in common, even when you don't speak the same language, even when your skin is a different color, even when you were raised in completely different socioeconomic backgrounds. That fellowship and camaraderie is so powerful. It draws us together so powerfully that, some of those things that make us different, they almost disappear. That's been my experience, is that in having cross-cultural friendships, that we sort of really connect with our humanity and, what we have in common as opposed to what we have different from each other. That's a really important part of travel that is missed. And I think people are having to decide now, like, what's worth it. When you're talking about cost benefit analysis, travel was always risky. It was risky for lots of different reasons. And sometimes the people who are making decisions about risk aren't necessarily weighing the benefit. And so I think a lot of people are struggling with that because they're saying, they're asking you, to curtail this thing because it's non-essential. I love that definition of what became essential and what became non-essential. And I would have to disagree with some of the decisions that were made because of what I consider essential. I may not agree with what's essential and non-essential. And I think human community is absolutely essential, and that it's worth some risk. So, maybe I think probably the way that we live and the fears that we have faced and surmounted probably changed the way that we viewed the world in 2020 and 2021. We would probably be considered risky people, risk takers. And our parents didn't want to live in caves either. And so we were visiting family at a time where other people were, still quarantined. And so we would be we're unsafe, I guess. But we view safety as a bit of a farce. Safety is an illusion. Safety is not the most important thing to us. When people say safety first, I giggle because I'm like, there are so many things to me that are more important than safety. If you live a safe life, you will die with regret 100%. I can tell you that is true. A beautiful, vibrant, exciting life requires risk. It is not safe. In fact, probably the most vibrant, wonderful memories that we have involve doing things that were not safe and surviving them.
Well, and I think there's magic in that, right? And I think you're right in the way that you talk about how people are now sort of weighing the risk and what they really think risk is. Because if the world has learned anything in the last couple of years, it's you need to determine for yourself what risk you're willing to take and where your comfort level is, and be okay with that. And move forward with life.
And to respect other people, because they're not necessarily going to come to the same conclusion that you came to about the risk and the benefit. We have to respect people's differing viewpoints. I think that's a really important thing to remember. And very rarely does one size fit all.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's the big problem we've had globally over the last year and a half, 2 years is there is this blanket of one size fits all everywhere. And for those of us who do travel, we know so much better, right? Because there's not better or worse anywhere else. There's just different. There's different lifestyles. Yeah. There's different choices. There's different risks that you take on in all of these different places. Maybe somebody doesn't necessarily have the same amenities that you have, but they have something different that is a benefit to their life. And that's why things function differently in different places. So there is no, better or worse. There's just different. And I think that's one of the magical things about travel is you start to expand what your viewpoint is and you change what your thought process is about life. And this one size fits all lifestyle that we're told is what we're supposed to be living becomes very clear that it is not a one size fits all world at all. And so I love that you guys have given that perspective to your kids as well. And I'm sure.
Yeah, about that, we just didn't even know what to expect. We raised them very differently than we had been raised. And now as they're launching, one by one, there's this thing where all of our friends whose kids went to school and did the normal thing, they're going off to college and our kids are not doing the traditional thing. And my husband kind of looked at me, he's like, I'm a little bit nervous that they're making these alternative choices. But then I was like, well, what did we expect? We showed them that there are multiple paths to success. And now they're taking these multiple paths. We shouldn't be surprised that, our oldest doesn't want to continue his education. He's got a 2-year degree that he got from a community college. And he's doing his pilot training so that he can fly airplanes. And he's not sure. Yeah. So he's not sure if he even needs another 2 years of university. And so we're like, well, are you sure? Is it, well, that was what we said to them. We said, you find something that you love and go after it and then do whatever you need to get that thing, whether that means you need a piece of paper or you don't need a piece of paper. Maybe it's having a connection with the right person, or maybe it's a different kind of education than, a traditional education. So they're actually taking our advice and now we're all nervous about it. What did we expect? They're doing exactly what we hoped they would do. But as a parent, you're still watching it with trepidation. It doesn't matter that we lived, adventurously. We're like parents all over the world. We still, want them to live their best life. And we want to make sure that they're, seeking their purpose and finding it and happy and healthy. And you'll worry about your kids no matter from whatever walk of life you're in. That's a universal about parents. So actually, I'm on the one hand a little nervous to see them making these decisions that are so different from the decisions we made. And at the other hand, I feel so proud of them for, doing something a little bit different. We raised them in a different way. They are different people, and they're all wonderfully weird and have embraced their unique qualities. They weren't sort of squashed into a certain shape by the mold because we didn't, stick them in that mold.
And there is magic in that. And the fact that, they are taking this alternative path. They're not going to be kids who struggle to figure out who they are because they've already figured that out and they have their whole lives ahead of them to keep chasing their dreams and doing whatever magical thing they feel like they need to do next. There's a magic in that.
Well, I think they were given the opportunity. I mean, our schooling was very it was very organic. We did a lot of the, what I would consider the have-tos in the morning, the reading and writing and arithmetic. And those things we did some traditional subjects, but in the afternoons, they were really free to explore all of their own interests, whether it was music or flying or, whatever. One of our kids loves to fix things. Almost all of them play musical instruments. They had time to explore their own interests. But to say that we spared them the angst of growing up or of finding themselves is probably not true. As we watch our oldest kids struggle with the questions of why am I here and what am I for and what is the purpose of my life, I realized that we can't really spare them that process. As much as we would like for them to learn from our mistakes, or as much as we would like for them to cut the corners because, they should have found themselves by now because we gave them all this leeway to figure out who they are. I think that angst and that struggle of finding your own feet underneath you is a really important part of growing up. And so as much as I would have liked to have spared them all those struggles, we're watching them struggle a little bit. But they're not floundering, but it is hard. Growing up is hard, and your parents can't save you that hardship, unfortunately. But when you come through that, I think when you come through hardship, one of the things our culture doesn't really value, I think, is suffering and hardship. We don't value it at all. And as a sailor, I value it highly. I don't really, I learned more from failure than I did from success. And I appreciate the sunsets at the, the sun setting over the sea and the dolphins jumping and the, gorgeous dives that we did on coral reefs. I appreciate those things more because we lived without comfort, because we, crossed a, savage sea to get there. I actually think that we need the lows to balance the highs. And so I think that struggle and hardship are very valuable. And to some degree, I don't want to shield my children from disappointment and hardship because those are the things that you value later when you look back on them. Those are the places where a lot of intense personal growth come from. So our culture doesn't value, I think, all those struggles. But if you listen to any motivational speech by anyone, it's always some hardship that they overcame and what they learned from it. In fact, I wrote an entire memoir about the life lessons that we learned from hardship and mistakes and storms at sea. All those life lessons were hard won. And so I was able to craft an entire memoir of things that I learned the hard way.
I love that. And it's given you such a unique perspective on life that a lot of people don't have. So do you want to mention a little bit about the book and then the title of the book for people who are listening to this and they're like, I don't know how she did it, but I want to be living this crazy life. Talk a little bit about the book.
Sure. I actually wrote the book not for sailors, although I think a sailor would certainly identify with the stories that I share. I wrote it for the average Joe, the average working Joe who might have an unfulfilled dream. And you could either live our life vicariously or, could maybe even be like a bit of a roadmap if you're thinking about escaping, what escape might look like. Or it would at least cause you to ask questions about your dreams and about, how you might begin to think about breaking free. The book is called Leaving the Safe Harbor: The Risks and Rewards of Raising a Family on a Boat. And it can be found at Amazon, but you can also go into a local bookstore and ask, and they can get it for you. I love supporting those little local bookstores. So that would make my heart happy if you went in and asked for it. And it was a joy to write. It's full of our memories of family travel. And it's full of those lessons that were, learned the hard way from hardship and suffering. And some of it is, there's one chapter called Smooth Sailing, and it's a very thin chapter. So those sea stories that you imagine, those are fun to tell. The day we met the cold front, those things are fun to talk about. It's harder to write about, the glorious sailing days. They're, easily and quickly told, but those hardship stories, man, those are fun to write, and they're fun to read probably too. You can experience a storm at sea without getting seasick.
Which is perfect for people who do get seasick. I have loved having you today. I do want to be respectful of your time because I know we're pushing the 1 hour that we had booked. But before I let you go, because you've learned so many different lessons, you have such a different perspective than most people on life. Is there anything else that you want to share with the Chasing Happiness community before I let you go?
Sure. I mean, we talk about, I love the title of Chasing Happiness, by the way, and I'm spending a little bit of time on your Facebook page and looking at like what you're all about. It's fantastic. And, we have these different terms that we use kind of interchangeably, happiness and joy and pleasure and contentment. And I think to some degree they share qualities, but happiness is very much, you have a lot of control over your happiness, and you have the potential to change your mood, through controlling your thought life and through the choices that you make. But a word that I like more than happiness is joy. I guess what I would pursue more than happiness, which can kind of go up and down based on circumstances, is something deeper. I can feel joy even in the middle of hardship and pain. I guess I would be in pursuit of a deep and abiding happiness. And for me, that comes from my relationship with God. I'm going to go ahead and put a name on the universe. For me, it's God, and it's my spiritual life and my spiritual walk. And, even through the hardest times that we've experienced, I've had that sense of inner peace and joy. That means I'm willing to take the risk because I know that even in the middle of the hardship, it's worth it. So I guess what I would tell people is to overcome their fear with faith, and to seek that place of peace and joy that abides no matter what the circumstances bring you. And I definitely am walking the talk. We've been sort of stuck in Florida for a couple of years, not traveling and not doing the things that we love. But I tried to use that time wisely, both to just be a solid for my family so that they would remember this time we have happy memories even of this time where we were kind of shut down, and then I used it to write a book so that something good could come out of something bad. So I guess that's what I would love to encourage your listeners to pursue, is that deep and abiding sense of joy, whatever it is that gets them that.
I love that, especially because it can be so different for different people. So for everyone who is listening, I, of course, will share links in the show notes and on social media to all the things, social media, book, everything else, so that you can find it. You can follow the story. You can read the blog and sort of relive some of the journey of this boat and this magical family. And I cannot thank you enough for joining me today. Talking to you has been such a pleasure and such an inspiration because while I may not be going to live on a boat anytime soon, I am definitely thinking about all of the travel that I'm going to be booking for the next year. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for letting me share a little piece of my story.
Thank you. And for those of you who are listening, thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we will chat with you next week. Bye for now.